All right. I have just a couple of things to mention to you guys. The first thing is, I hope that all of you guys are taking advantage of the Ransom Cafe. And they were telling me that we've had, so the great thing about the Ransom Cafe is you kind of pay what you can. And so for people at our church who have lost their jobs or are having a difficult time on a really fixed income or whatever, if they can't pay, like a suggested donation, then it's great and it's a beautiful, wonderful ministry. But they were saying that on Wednesday nights, there's a whole lot of people that are needing to take advantage of that. And so if you are a person that can give more than that $5 suggested donation, it sure would help that ministry to the people who aren't able to pay that. So anyway, they just asked me to mention that to you guys. I also wanted to tell you that when I was working on this course earlier this summer, I was really concerned about the amount of research that it was going to take. and I remember thinking to myself, there was a moment where I thought, man, I really wish my Old Testament professor from seminary had written a book, because I knew that because my favorite thing is to find a really great book and then to use the footnotes to find the best things, right? And so I was looking at a syllabus for another course that I was considering taking, and in the little recommended reading area, there was a book by my Old Testament professor. And so that is a lot of a starting point for our outline here. And so if you're interested in reading some more, this is the book. It's called The Epic of Eden. It's by Sandra Richter. And so she's like really smart. And incredible professor. And so actually, Richter, R-I-C-H-T-E-R, and Sandra Richter. And so anytime I can get someone to engage with her, it's a good day.
We should make our course.
It was my first course in seminary, and I was a young adult who felt like I just didn't have enough time to even take one course. I didn't know what I was thinking, taking a course, right? Right now I'm taking two. I've got 3 children, right? But that was before I knew any better. And so anyway, it was my first course. I had no idea. I think I made, it was either high C or low B, C plus or B minus. And at the end of it, I felt like an utter failure. But it was one of those moments where I was like, okay, I got to set this thing up, right? And because, I don't know, I always feel like I learn better from professors who grade hard, because I can't slack off, right? And so she was definitely one of those professors. All right, enough of that. Well, I guess we'll see. Here, don't let me forget. It's been one of those days. Don't let me forget to tell you about a new class that's going to be really interesting in the future. All right. So, today we're going to be talking about Noah and Abraham. So, just to kind of remind you where we left off last week, this is where we started, right? So, Eden, all people of God enjoying the presence of God, and then the whole thing is broken. There's this separation that happens as a result of their choice to basically decide for themselves what is good and evil, instead of allowing God to tell them what's good and evil, right? And so, from that point forward, it is God's plan to reestablish the connection with the people. So, it starts with Noah, and then we're going to talk about Noah, one man, and then Abraham, he makes a covenant with one family, Israel with one nation, and then in Jesus with the church and the world. And so just to kind of give you an idea where we are and where we're headed. So we're going to do both of these today, and then we're going to do Moses, which is right here, and then so Israel is the Moses covenant, and then we're going to do David and the rest on the final week. And then we will be done with the whole Old Testament in 5 weeks. All right, so Noah. So let's open your Bibles, right? You have Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, which we spent a good bit of time on last week. Then we have Cain and Abel. And then we have a time where it talks about kind of a genealogy from Adam to Noah. And then you get to Noah. So the question is, how much time has passed? And the answer is, a lot. A whole lot of time has passed. And it's not dateable time. It's in an area, I put these slides out of order, but we'll just go with it. It's in an area called Mesopotamia. I took this picture with my phone, so sorry. But you see the Mediterranean Sea here, the Caspian Sea, Egypt, Arabia, Persian Gulf, Mesopotamia, and Canaan. And so we're in that Mesopotamia region. There's just lots and lots of horrible flooding there. And so in Ur, you are Abraham's hometown. There is, when they excavate archaeology, archaeologists, they take off layer by layer, and what they do is they'll find things in a layer of rubble that can be dated, right? And so as soon as they find that, and pottery is the best and easiest thing for them to date. When they find a pottery fragment, they can date that layer, and then it's easy to tell kind of where things are. But right around in the mid-3000s BC, in Abraham's hometown, there's a 3-foot layer of a massive flood, right? Massive flood around 3000 BC. In Kish, another big city, in the mid-2000s, there's another huge flood layer that they found. And so what we can tell from archaeology is that this region, there's a lot of floods. A lot of floods. And it's catastrophic. Not just like a little tiny flood, like a flood that wipes everything away. And it's important to realize, their building methods, right, is bricks, clay bricks. They don't fire them in a kiln. So, when you have a sun-dried clay brick that is submerged in water, it just becomes clay again. And so, that's one of the reasons that in this time period, it's difficult to find things in this area, because what happens is when it floods, it floods. And all the construction is it's not just rubble, it's nothing, it's dirt, right? And there's a lot more. So whenever they're excavating, if they go down deep enough, they find one of these massive flood layers. And so you've got a lot of stories of floods, of catastrophic floods in that area. One of the most famous is one called the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is an incredible, if you read it, it is super parallel with the Noah account. Very, very, very similar. You read it in places and you think you're reading the book of Genesis talking about Noah, right? This one guy gets on a boat with all the animals, right? Shuts it up. It's just going to be him and his family. The whole earth is destroyed by a flood and they stay on there. I mean, it's really, really similar. And I can't remember the guy's name. It's like something real weird, like Upnaptum or something. Anyway, I don't know why I went down that rabbit trail. Sometimes you see it. Bunny ears poke up and you're like, oh, cool. So, Epic of Gilgamesh, and lots of them. But here's how all of the non-biblical stories have a specific kind of way that it goes. And that way is that the gods get mad, or a god gets mad, or there's a really, really particularly mischievous god that goes against all the other gods. And those gods this is why I had this one here. What they do is they untap this pillar, the pillars of the earth, the primordial deep that we talked about last week. They unlock the water that's below the earth, and they let everything get destroyed. In Noah, it's a totally different setup, right? Noah, it's all about the sin of humanity has reached an incredibly horrible peak. And it's now time for God to deal with that. And it's one of those moments where it can't go on any longer. And we're going to talk about why it could not be allowed to go on any longer. And so, it's also couched in this redemptive story, right? So what happens is, it's kind of a decreation event. So you've got the creation in the first and second chapters, and then things get really bad, and it's like everybody has been left to their own devices, and the sin has gone unchecked and undealt with. And we get a chance to see in the very beginning of chapter 6, it says, "When men began to increase in number on earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. And they married any of them they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will become 120 years. The Nephilim, we're going to talk about that at the end, were on the earth in those days and afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time." Every inclination of every heart was only evil all the time. So what begins with a single choice in creation account, has gone all the way to its fullest extent. There is nothing redeemable left. Only evil, all the time, every single thought. And so, what happens, and when you read the entire narrative of Scripture, you understand that this decreation that's about to happen is part of God's redemptive plan, right? We've just charted that out, right? It's part of God's redemptive plan. And so, the difference between these other narratives is that the gods aren't angry at us. It's not that. It's that God is ready to start build a relationship again, right? God is ready to begin redeeming what went wrong in the first couple of chapters of Genesis. And this is the first step. And it is a really difficult to... if you think back a couple of years ago about the tsunami, there was... I was reading a report that said that there was a moment where the waves were moving so fast that cars could not outrun them. Some people said that it was well over 100 miles an hour that some of these massive waves began to come in because of the way that some of these areas were shaped. And that's what we've got to think about when we think of... my kids have like 3 Noah's Ark play sets, right? And they're all little stuffed animals, and it's cute, and there's a little boat, and Noah, he's got a big long curly beard, and right? And it's cute. And we kind of, because we grow up with that in the church, we kind of think of it as a cute thing. It's not a cute thing. Right? We think of the devastation and the like horrible crying and everything that happened with the tsunami. That's what's happening here. It's the opposite of what happens in the first and second chapters of Genesis. It's clean slate, right? Now, before we go too much further, it's important to note, if you read this whole story, which we're not going to read the whole story, Noah never speaks. He never says a word. But what is said about Noah and what he models is that Noah obeys God. That's it. God asks him to do something wild. Noah obeys God. He doesn't argue with him. He's not like Moses, who's trying to weasel his way out of whatever it is, right? Noah obeys God. And that is the message of this story. So there's water metaphors throughout this is the very first of a lot of water metaphors that happen in the scriptures. So we have the ark, right? And then we have a second, very tiny ark that appears in Moses' story. Right? Moses is put in a basket, floated out in the water, and, they find him, and he grows up, in that really opulent atmosphere. And then, later, the Israelites have this moment where they encounter water on one side, and they see these kind of waters as very, very, very scary, right? It's the chaos of the world. It's the things that destroy everything when they get out of hand. And so they walk up to this water, and so they've got horribly afraid in front of them, and then, soldiers behind them, and the water parts, walk through the water. And then, as with Moses, so they walk through the water the first time, and then they have the same thing. They walk through the same parted sea with Joshua when they enter the promised land. And then there's a really great moment. But before we read about Jesus, let's look here in Job chapter 38. So, Job chapter 38. So it's Ezra, Nehemiah, Job. Psalms. I'm sorry. I'm bad. I have the song that plays in my head. That's why I know Esther. There's a really great VeggieTale about Esther that my daughter loves. I should know where that is. All right, chapter 38, and we're going to start in verse 8. It says, "Who shut up the seas behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness, when I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, 'This far may you come and no farther. Here is where your proud waves halt.'" So, Genesis chapter 1, God is God over this primordial deep, this very scary water thing that we have to encounter in this region, right? Now, fast forward several thousand years to Mark chapter 4. Verse 35. So God releases the waters, God puts them back, and eventually we're going to see that he says he's not going to do that again, right? And so throughout the people of Israel's time, their God has control over the water. That is a hallmark of who Yahweh is. So here we are in Mark chapter 4. And that day, starting in verse 35, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion, wet cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, you don't care if we drown." Remember, the disciples are fishermen, okay? This isn't just any storm, okay, all right? They've been in storms before. They know how to deal with storms. This is a particularly bad storm. They're afraid they're going to die from this storm, so they wake Jesus up. He gets up, he rebukes the wind, he says to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And for me, when I read that, it makes me think back to Job, right? Where it says, "This far may you come and no further," right? He has authority over the water, right? And then wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. So who are they thinking this guy might be? God. So this is one of those moments where it would be clear to the Jewish people, these guys were thinking the unthinkable, not ready to quite go there, but thinking, who is the only one we know that has this kind of, wow, I'm not ready to, but let's keep our eyes on him, right? And so, you have the decreation. You have the horrible catastrophe. And then we know the whole deal. He sends out the dove, nothing. Over and over, and then it comes back with something growing, right? Something alive. And it's time for a new covenant in chapter 9. We're going to read chapter 9, verses 1 through 7, and then we're going to go back to chapter 1. Actually, you know what? Let's read chapter 1 first. That might make chapter 9 even more fun. 1 verse 28.
This is Mark, right?
I'm sorry, Genesis.
Genesis.
Sorry. I'm on my own drummer. Right. So here we go. 1 verse 28. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seeds in it. They will be yours. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food," and it was so. Now, chapter 9. And God said, and then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall upon all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, upon every creature that moves along the ground, and upon the fish of the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the plants, now I give you everything. You must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it. And for your lifeblood I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal, from each man too. I will demand an accounting for the life of his fellow man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God has created man. As for you, be fruitful and increase in number. Multiply on earth and increase upon it." You see the parallel? So it's the same covenant, and then some new things. There's a rule about killing people, which is a horrible thing, but it's clear at this point that we've got to have some other limits besides just don't eat that tree, right? Animals are food at this point. Before it was only plants being food. And then, and this is what's really great, the covenant with Noah is for all humanity, right? It is the family that is going to multiply and fill the earth. So, we see, even with Noah, that the covenant that is established here is ultimately a covenant for all of humanity. And then, there's an unfortunate story. Noah plants a vineyard, makes some wine, drinks too much wine, passes out in his tent, naked, which is incredibly shameful. It's shameful for us, but very shameful for them. And let's just read it. Genesis chapter 9, verse 18. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the earth. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. But Shem, so that was, there's a lot of argument as to what that means. Saw his father's nakedness. It seems to be some sort of an idiom, some sort of a euphemism for something. They don't really know what, but it's not good. At the very least, it means he saw his father naked, and that was a disgrace for his father. But Shem, and so he does that, and then he goes and tells his brothers, which is even more of a disgrace. Right? So he disgraced his father by whatever happened, and then he went out and told that disgraceful thing to his brothers. But his brothers weren't disgraceful. Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backwards and covered their father's nakedness. Their face was turned the other way so that they would not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest had done, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord of God, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend the territory of Japheth. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his slave." So Shem. Shem means name, which is interesting because Shem will eventually be Israel. And Israel, one of the terms for Israel is people of the name. So, and that is implying Yahweh, right? The four-letter name of God that nobody speaks. People of the name. But it's interesting that that's what Shem's name is. So that will be Israel. Shem will be Israel. Japheth means spacious. And he will be the Gentiles. He ends up being the large numbers of Gentiles to the north. Then Ham becomes the people of Egypt and Canaan. Ham becomes the people of Egypt and Canaan. Canaan is specifically cursed. Canaan is the people dwelling in the land when the Israelites have to come and drive them out. They're supposed to kill all of them. They don't end up killing all of them. That's a whole other problem. But they go into the land, and it ends up that Canaan has the worst fate of all of the three. There's a word back there, and it's a word that whenever somebody reads it, I get an email. When we talked about the flood, and it's a word. Does anybody remember the word? Did you pay attention when the daughters and the sons of God, and it's called the Nephilim, or Nephilim, or I don't know. There's some appropriate way to say that. But the Nephilim. So the sons of God go in with the daughters of men. And there is a little bit of debate, but historically the consensus is that that means there are angels who come down to earth. And it says they go into the women. So they have... they get them pregnant, and the offspring of human and angels equals these Nephilim. And they're giants, and there's another reference to them in the book of Numbers, chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13, verse 33. we saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in their eyes. It's when they're exploring Canaan. They come back and they say, there are giants there, the Nephilim. And so there's a huge problem. The problem is that the Nephilim are not just human. There's some mingling of whatever dimension or existence an angel has and human. And it's at that point that God has to put a stop. Because mankind is once again trying to become like God, right? Breeding or however. They're allowing this stuff to happen, and it's gotten to the place where it's time to reset. I'm sorry, that was... But there is another way to understand it, and this is what Sandra Richter says, though I couldn't find another scholar who agreed with her, unfortunately. I loved her, but sometimes people are just wrong. But that was that the sons of God and the daughters of men. You could translate that as saying the descendants of Adam and the descendants of Eve, and so these were just humans, but really big humans. So that's Noah. Any questions on Noah right now?
I don't think. I disagree with you on one thing. I don't think angels came down and read with them because angels don't read in Matthew somewhere. It says.
Right. And so
They don't marry.
they don't marry.
It says they don't marry.
Right.
No, mine says, okay, go ahead, but I didn't read that other part. But anyway.
Right. It says that. And so that's why there's not, it's been an interesting, it's one of those things. There's a couple of passages in the Bible that are sufficiently foggy, and there's almost nothing else about it, that people like to spend lots of time thinking and talking about it, because they can think of whatever they want, really, right? And this is one of those places, right? And so they've got this Nephilim word, and historically it's been that angels came down, and that was a bad thing. And so some people take it from there and say that was demons, and that was fallen angels.
Excuse me. I do agree with this, but I have a question, and I've read this before, and it just now occurred to me. If they all died in the flood, then how did they get to be descendants over here in Israel?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it has several answers. Okay? One answer is it could be that Nephilim came to be a designation of giant people, really large people, right? And that is one way that you can explain it. The other way is that when this region floods, it floods all of the area that anybody would have ever known to be the world, right? And so it's very easy for there to be a global flood in the sense of the whole world that anyone had ever known at that point in that region, right? And yet, not to be a global flood, like covering the whole earth. And what people who believe that kind of interpretation point to is that say, in this region, you can't find a culture that doesn't have a flood story. But in China, you can. And in Europe, you can. And so it seems consistent with what's been discovered thus far that there's giant floods that happen in this region, and it's all of what those people think of as the world. But it may not be the world that we understand, right? The people who have satellites in space, right? So that's kind of the two answers to that. Anybody have another question? All right, let's hop on into Abraham.
We got to be sure one thing.
Yes.
There was a flood.
There was a flood. There were lots of floods, right?
There was a flood, and they found the ark. They probably found parts of the
Yeah, I've got, so the pastor that I grew up with, he, from time to time, would lead tours of the Holy Land, right? And he explained, when I brought that to him, I'd say, hey, they found the ark. He showed me this nail, right? And he says, this is what people do over there a lot, right? This nail is from the 1st century, right? And so, right around the time that Jesus died, he says, I don't know, but this could be the nail, right? And so they found some wood, right, that was from that time period, and was really big, and was most likely part of a large vessel. I said, this could be the wood, right? Right, it was where it should be, right? So, but the only person that's going to know is Noah. So we'll ask him on the other side.
I made inquire when I was a kid and I read the National Enquirer.
That's right.
That was my first.
Pinnacle of journalistic excellence. But so Abraham, the story of Abraham is the beginning of datable history, right? So when you say Noah, we say it was a long time ago. When we say Abraham, we can place it very precisely in about 2000 BCE. Somewhere in that neighborhood, give or take 500 years or so, right? So somewhere around 2000 BCE, the Middle Bronze Age, is Abraham. And so this is Abraham's region. This is the one that has the big 3 foot, the massive, massive flood layer. And over here, if you follow so he is called to leave and go up, and he ends up settling up in Haran, or whatever. And then he comes out of there, and he ends up going down here into Canaan. So what we're going to do with him, because I think it's the easiest, is just we're going to follow the biblical narrative. We're going to take and summarize some of the key chapters in his life here. And so we're going to start in Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12. Unfortunately, that means we skip the Tower of Babel, but we live to fight another day. The call of Abram. The Lord said to him, Abram, leave your country, your people, your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So, God's call to Abram. We live in a very mobile society. It's not unusual for us to have children that leave home. As a matter of fact, when they get of a certain age, we're irritated if they don't leave home, right? Or when they come back, and so what happens here for Abram seems to us, wow, that was a big deal. He left home, but it's very different. They are a tribal society. Everything is about family. Everything is about family. The best way to kind of grasp the difference is this. If you go to a job interview and you can tell. You talk to the people in the room. This guy, no experience. This guy, experience with no education. This guy, I don't know. And then all of a sudden you say, oh, it's this guy's cousin. Gotcha. Okay? And then you say, wow, I have a lot of education, a lot of experience, proven track record, right? You go in there and you're like, this is mine, right? I'm obviously the top candidate. You rock the interview. And then you don't get the job, and the next day you see the guy's cousin, he's like, I got the job! And you feel wrong, right? You hire the best person. You don't hire your cousin because he's your cousin, right? There's rules about it. Our church has a rule about it. There's a nepotism rule, and things can change once people are hired and changed around. But if my wife wants to come and be my secretary, it's just not going to happen, right? She can't work for me. So we have nepotism rules, and because our society values your qualifications as primary in selecting jobs. It's the opposite for them. For them, if they had a position and anybody, even the no good, lazy brother-in-law, right? The one who that guy, right? He comes. If you don't hire him for the job, your name is mud. People won't sell you stuff. I mean, it's as severe as you can imagine, because it would be the highest form of dishonor to not hire your own family above anyone else, no matter their qualifications. So, totally different society. Everything was tied to your family. Your 401k was your family, right? Your job was your family. Your future was your family. I had a friend who came. He moved down here from Chicago, and he talked like he moved down here from Chicago. And if people didn't, he learned how to talk a little bit better, and people wouldn't, the initial question wouldn't be, "You're from around here, aren't you?" Right? That wasn't, eventually, the question was, "Well, who's your family?" Right? Because that's a big deal in the South. And then he said, "My family's so-and-so." I've never heard of him. I don't know anybody with that last name. And because, the game is, the Steeles. "Oh, do you know my cousin, he married a Steele." Right? Are you kin to that Steele? And his family's a big thing to me. Even bigger. Even bigger. Family is absolutely everything. And so God is asking Abraham to leave it all behind. Money, well-being. He's going to move into an area. He's not going to have family there. He's not going to, they don't know his back. What horrible thing has he done that his family would do this to him? Or what kind of a horrible person is this that he would do this to his family? So God asks him to pay just below the ultimate price. And for what? To be the father of a great nation, and, this is a big deal, to have a deity as his patron. By that, I mean, it was often that, his patron would be his father, and sometimes you might have another family member or somebody who really liked you who would become kind of your protector, right? You helped them out, they really liked you, and if somebody was mean to you, they would, take care of it. And if somebody was nice to you, they wanted to get in good with the rich, powerful guy that could be nice to you, and he'd be like, "Oh, that's my favorite little nephew. Come here. Here, let me help you out." So that's an earthly patron. He was going to get, the language there is of patronage. So he was going to get a divine patron. Yes, he's going to be leaving it all behind, but God is promising the highest level of protection, the highest level of blessing that he could at that moment. And then, and this is important because this repeats an aspect of the covenant with Noah. If you look in chapter 12, verse 3, "I will bless the one who blesses you, and whoever curses you I will curse," which is important because that's the patronage. And then, "and all peoples on the earth will be blessed through you." Right? So this is another covenant. Not just for Abraham, but in the future for all the people. It begins with Abraham, it begins with Noah, continues with Abraham, But God's ultimate vision that he keeps repeating is the whole world. All the earth. Let's go to Genesis chapter 15. So he makes this great, fantastic promise. And then there's the waiting. And more waiting. And more waiting. And there's no child. Nothing's going on with that. Abraham does get a lot of other stuff. He gets wealth, he gets fame, he gets all this kind of stuff, but he's still no child. And that's, the key to having a nation's worth of descendants is having a descendant, right?
Yeah.
At least one. And he doesn't have that yet. And so, Genesis chapter 15, it says, after this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. And at this point you get the sense that though Abram really, really wants to trust God, he's not sold on the idea, right? So much so that he's like, look, I've got to be responsible. They lived in a very dangerous world, right? Animal could take him out any day. And so he had said, well, if God doesn't make good on this, Eliezer, and he appoints a descendant, a person to receive all of that, right? And so he has a chosen heir. But then God reiterates his promise to him. And this is one of the beautiful passages of Scripture. He says in verse 4, then the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside. And he said, look up at the heavens. Count the stars if you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. There was a moment a couple of years ago when I had taken some people on a retreat to a place called CFAT in Lineville, Alabama. And if you want to know where Lineville is, you go to a place called the middle of nowhere. And then about half an hour outside of that is Lineville. And so we're there, we have a wonderful worship service, and I go outside and, we have so much light pollution in cities that you just don't see a lot at night. I go out there and it's cool because, if it's really clear and there's not a lot of light, you can see our galaxy, right? You can see the pattern of the galaxy in the sky. And so I walk out there and I'm just like, wow, this is amazing. It's beautiful. And this guy comes up and he's looking, he's like, wow, I've never seen so many stars. I said, yeah, there's no light pollution, and it's a cloudless night. You can see everything. He said, well, it's not a cloudless night. There's the cloud there. I was like, no, that's the galaxy. That's the Milky Way. Right? We're in it. We see it like that. And he said, wow, right? And so, by the way, your ultimate possibility is to see 6,000 stars if you ever wondered. That's what the most you're going to see. But whatever. With the naked eye on a clear night and no light pollution. If you ever wondered. But God isn't saying 6,000. Because if you've ever tried to count stars, you know that's not happening, right? So that's not it. But, so he's in the real night sky, he's in the middle of the desert, and there's not been the electric light bulb, right? We don't have light pollution. He can see just this brilliant display. And so, I imagine that he's looking up and he's like, wow, that's wonderful. Look at that. Yeah, and then God says, that's how many. And he's like, oh. And so, then in, so here's Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. So even though it's impossible to understand, Abram, it's so impossible to imagine with no child at this point that he's appointed another heir. At this point, he's like, wow, well, okay. So, fast forward again several thousand years, we're going to look at Galatians. Galatians chapter 3. It says, "You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Before your very eyes Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed and crucified. I would like to learn just one thing from you. Did you receive the Spirit by observing the law, or by believing what you heard? Are you so foolish? After beginning with the Spirit, are you now trying to attain your goal by human effort? Have you suffered so much for nothing? If it really was for nothing, does God give you His Spirit and work miracles among you because you observe the law, or because you believe what you heard? Consider Abraham. He believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Understand then that those who believe are the children of Abraham. The Scripture foresaw that God would justify the Gentiles by faith and announce the gospel in advance to Abraham. All nations will be blessed through you. So those who have faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith." So in Abraham, we had the first moment where it's about having faith in what God is saying, regardless of whether or not you think it can happen. Right? It's not having faith in what you can do, right? Because if that's it, you have to appoint an heir at this point. So at this point, it's faith is the primary, and it's a huge, huge moment in the biblical narrative. So this is the first, faith first response. Now God is making it clear He's giving Abraham the land that he lives in. And we talked about the covenant ceremony. We're not going to go over that. If you want to hear something really interesting, go on to, it's on my website, jeremywords.com/threads. And so all the videos from this course will be on there. And the first week, all of the covenant ceremony, really, really interesting. But what's important to remember at this point is that the best reward that Abraham gets, or that Abram gets, the ultimate thing is in verse 1. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." The real reward for Abram is the presence of God. Right? The presence that was lost in the garden, Abram is getting back. So it's place and presence. Right? The place was gone in the garden. The presence was gone in the garden. And here we have it back. Place, God's going to give him Canaan. And presence, God is giving him Himself as His great reward. And then, not so much faith. Right? Abram... His wife says, "Look, this isn't happening. I'm old. This really isn't happening. So if we want this to happen, you need to have an heir." So she sends her maid in with Abram, and they have a baby, Ishmael, which is where the Muslims trace their lineage back to Abram. And if you want more about that, I'm preaching a sermon in the evening worship this week. Is the God of Muhammad the father of Abraham? I mean, the father of Jesus. This is the God of Muhammad, the father of Jesus. And this is where they trace that back. So he sends them out because what happens? Turns out, she gets pregnant, right? But let's back up from that. Before that happens, right? Genesis 17, God has not delivered on His promise, but He doesn't seem very concerned, right? It says, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will confirm my covenant between me and you, and will greatly increase your numbers." Abram fell face down, and God said to him, "As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations." Blah, blah, blah. Right? And he says, he reaffirms the covenant. Then, Abram says, "But there's, I'm getting them nations." And that's clear, but there's no descendant. Right? And so, he reaffirms the covenant with him now with a new name. Oh, wow, I can't believe it's so late. But, so sad. Well, the new name, his old name was Abram. Ab is father. Ram is exalted. So he was exalted father. Now, it's Ab, father, and Haman, multitude. And so this was a big deal in their culture. If you were promoted, if you had a huge raise in status by somebody, if you were a king and you made somebody who was, and you made the prince, the official prince, right, the official heir, you changed their name. If the prince became a king, you changed their name. And so this is a huge, huge thing in their culture. It formalizes and confirms their new role. And then there's another practice that he starts called circumcision. Not a new practice. Lots of people circumcised at that time. Circumcision happened as a rite of passage for adolescent males. And so there's a 6th dynasty tomb, Egyptian tomb, where there's a drawing of a circumcision happening. And under it, it's a quote from the doctor, no lie, not making this up. It says, hang on, let me make sure, "This will not hurt." That is the lie of the millennia, right? It's not going to hurt a bit, right? This will not hurt. But it's unique here because it's infants, it's babies, right? And so there it was a rite of passage into adulthood. Here it was being marked. It was the sign of God. And it's the covenant of God with Abram is a reproductive covenant, right? It's about lots and lots of babies and grandbabies and great-grandbabies and all of that, right? And so this confirmation of the covenant is a confirmation that deals with the reproductive organ, right? And so it's a sign of the covenant in a really profound way. And the women are there. This is a patriarchal society, and so the women are marked not by a cutting, but by the men that they were descended from and were married to. But we're out of time. So I promised I was going to tell you about some really interesting curriculum. So for the last 18 months, I write things sometimes for the General Methodist Church and publications and blah, 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 whatever. But one of the things that I realized is that we have this really great opportunity to connect with young families because they want their baby to be baptized, right? And so the other thing that I realized from my own experience is you have a baby and it's there, and if you're a Christian family, like my wife and I have this baby, it's laying there, and we think to ourselves, we really should be doing something, right? And we want him to grow up and love God. What are we supposed to be doing? I mean, he's like, at that point, he can't even hold up his own head, right? And so, my thought was that the church needed to do something about helping parents with spiritual development in their children through the first 5 years of their life. And so, over the last year and a half, I've been talking with Danny and psychologists and veteran parents, because I'm not one, going out to lunch with people and picking their brains. And the goal was not to give a parenting class, is not to develop any of that. There's 1,000 parenting things, right? But when the tragic thing is when I tried to find this, because I just wanted to find a curriculum and do it for our church. There's not one that exists. And so it's based on developmental psychology. So we take where their brain is developing, and then we created practical things that parents can do with their babies at that time to help them grow spiritually. Parenting, you can buy a book from Dr. Dobson if you like him, or buy Dr. Spock if you like him, or whoever, Dr. Joe if you like him, right? And so in November, it's finally completed. And in November, we're going to do, it's a 4-week class. And so what we're going to do is when somebody says, hey, I want to have my baby baptized, we're going to say, awesome, well, let's schedule your baptism. But we sure would love to sign you up for this class too, because it's just something, it's really practical. And then the other thing, this was really great, something that's really exciting me, because a lot of times, young adults, they go off and they do their thing, they have a baby, and they're like, wow, I need to get my act together, right? I need to get back involved in the church. And so we're going to use this time also for the parents' relationship with God. And so, the very fundamental, the very first way that we develop is trusting the world, trust or mistrust, right? That's our very basic level. And, but oftentimes I find at that moment, when you've done a lot of stuff, when you've gotten away from God, sometimes it's because you've stopped trusting God. Something happened to you or whatever, and so we deal in that time with trusting God as a parent, just my relationship with God. And so it's really cool. I'm really excited about it. In that first lesson, one of their practical tools is, because, again, there's a lot of, on the baby's side, and there's a lot of holding and feeding. And so they think about what they want for the future of their child. And we've got a nice card that they write the prayer for that child, and they put it on the table next to them, so while they're holding and rocking, there's something to remind them to pray for the future of their child. So anyway, I'm really excited about it. And you'll be hearing some more information we'll get out about it. But if you know anybody who's got babies, we're going to be doing that. And the final thing, and that's going to be probably the thing that everybody really likes, is a panel discussion. We're going to get a lot of people who've done this before, and you can pick their brain on whatever is difficult for you. So anyway, thank you guys for coming. And next week, it is Moses, right? And we go into the covenant with the nation. Thank you all. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Jeremy, yes.